can't you see way up in the sky? Making circles in the morning sun, flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away.
Where do I go? What is my quest here even?
Break away. I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Greetings indeed. Start off with some stuff here. Welcome into episode 1.12 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. We are picking up tonight on the aftermath of the flight to Varennes, which we covered last week. And we are now entering one of those tornadoes, the next tornado. We kind of had that lull from 1790 to the summer of 1791, and we're going to get into what occurs rolling into the fall of 1791, but July will be the focus tonight. But first off, let's see. Cy, Gilly with the raid, Cy with the host, Fletch with the host, Diggity with the host, Rocket with the host, Cy with the resub, 14 months at tier 3. Thank you very much, especially this week. There's going to be a little bit of special messaging about veterans tonight as we approach the first break. And we will also talk about how much money we raised July to August for disabled American veterans. So hang out as we get to about the 45-minute mark, usually when we take the break. And yeah, just have some stuff to say about some occurrences this week. But hey, there's Sturf, there's Perm. But the opening song tonight was also new. It was the new single coming off of Iron Maiden's about to be released album called Senjutsu, which will be released in the early portion of September. I think it's the 6th. But that's their new song. It's Steve Harris greatness, bass just jumping. It's a great song. And also found out, and this is more for Mads, because she's apparently a Judas Priest fan now, is that Judas Priest is working on their new album called Sermons of the Sinners. And that one is does not have a date, but their last album was great. So it's a good time to like the kind of metal I like. Yeah, most of the fam is here. So we have to get in tonight into, and this won't be as long as an episode as last week, because I kind of had to cut it off at a certain point because next week's topic is big. Next week, and you'll understand where we're going next week at the end of this episode, but this one's not going to run 2 hours and 40 minutes. Last week's episode was 5 seconds short of the longest episode in the entire series, and we're not going to come close to that tonight. We're actually 2 pages shorter in terms of overall outline than we were last week. But thanks everybody for being here. All the regulars, everyone who's hanging out. I see just names piling in, and that's always awesome. So remember last week, we covered the failed attempt to flee by the royal family from Paris to Montmédy, which is on the border of the Austrian Netherlands. And they made it as far as Varennes, and through a series of bad decisions and then comical happenstances, they got caught, basically due to the size of the nose on Louis XVI and how it was on the money. And they got caught and they got brought back to Paris, and it's that fiction that was, oh, are the royal family living in Paris because they want to be here or because we've told them to be here? That fiction was blown up, right? I'm watching Downton Abbey, and I was proud I got the reference to the Jacobins. The Jacobins will be referenced quite often as we roll through the 19th century, because everyone's going to look back to this period in history as how we also shall achieve freedom all across Europe. But remember, with that fiction, are the royal family here because they want to be? Are they here in Paris because they want to be? Or are they effectively under house arrest? That fiction was destroyed. And at the same time, last week we talked about the implementation of the civic oath of the clergy, that, have to swear to the state above the church, and how they had until November 1791 to take that oath. That's lurking out there still, right? We still have several months before that deadline comes. We also talked about how the Comte de Provence, the king's eldest brother, was able to get out of France on the same day as the flight to Varennes, and how he has actually set up a court in exile.
Thank you
Dr.
for wasting your money.
Thank you for the stream pack. The pack buys. So now the Comte de Provence has set up this court in exile, and they have openly declared their desire, their intent is to invade France to free the king. And the Comte de Provence has declared himself the regent of France, because he believes his brother is no longer capable of carrying out the duties of king. And then remember, we also talked about how senior army officers have started to emigrate in droves. That's going to become important in about 2 episodes. So episode 1.14, when we're actually going to get to war, the first of the wars that will encompass a generation for Europe. We'll start to frame that up in about 2 episodes. But just remember that we covered the army last week, and how the French army was basically dysfunctional at this point. 30 packs though, Doc. Thank you very much. So the monarchy becomes obviously what's on the tip of everyone's tongue as they are brought back from Varennes to Paris. And that fiction of the family being abducted, right? Remember, the assembly started to float that, oh, the king didn't, they didn't try to flee France. They were abducted by General de Bouilly. And they started to try to sell this narrative of that if the king didn't actually try to leave, even though he had left effectively a manifesto in the palace saying, I don't support anything that's happened since the tennis court oath. Frankly, I'm surprised the assembly and the commoners wanted to preserve the monarchy for so long. We're actually going to get into that a little bit down the line here. And it is good that we're talking about the assembly, or the bourgeois, and the commoners as 2 different things, because they are, this building divergence has been coming, and it's going to come and hit full swing tonight. But as the monarchy, the royal family is brought back to Paris, the questions start to go off in Paris and around France, like, will the monarchy be saved? Should it be saved? Do we want it to be saved? And everyone had to ask this question based on a ton of factors. Was it best for the nation? Was it best for themselves? But Louis and his family were now truly, effectively locked up in the Tuileries Palace. Their movements were largely restricted to the grounds. No more trips anywhere, obviously, right? Remember, they tried to go to Saint-Cloud, which they had always done, and it was stopped at their last attempt in the spring of 1791. Those trips are done. And this means the extended family, too. No more Holy Week trips to Rome. They're effectively prisoners in the palace now. But in the first weeks after the flight, so we're talking late June, early July 1791, it was not outside the realms of conception that the same mobs, the same core of type of people who had stormed the Bastille and marched on Versailles and prevented that trip to Saint-Cloud would now basically just shrug off whatever yoke of restraint they had left and simply end the royal family. And the fate of the royal family, and a potential disaster for the family at the hands of the mobs, haunted the respectable center of the assembly, those middle 1789ers that were trying to preserve the status quo, because remember, there's a constitution that's just about to come out, and that's going to be what we talk about next week. But the Constitution of 1791 is almost done, and that Constitution has the king as the center executive. So there is fear from the assembly centrists and the centrists in general of what could happen to the king now, because one, obviously it would be a horrible tragedy if we butchered their family. But two, he's a cornerstone to the new order, right? They're trying to preserve this new order of which he is a bedrock stone of. So they have to walk down this line of, what do we do? Because we need him. All the other people, remember the princes of the blood, the members of the royal family who could effectively succeed him in the monarchy, they're all gone. I mean, those, what, the Dauphin's going to replace Louis? Well, that can't happen. Someone would have to serve in regency. So there are two sides to this. There's the ethical side and the practical side. And the assembly is really looking at the practical side. They're looking at, we can't afford to lose Louis XVI because in order for this idea of government that we have spent the last 18 or so months on writing down and negotiating, he has to be present. So for over, like I said, for over a year, for over 18 months, these men have been just working on this Constitution, and that Constitution was nearly done, and this flight had put it all in jeopardy. And if the situation was going to be salvaged, the men in the center were going to need to react fast to clamp down on any populist risings from the left. And you have to remember, we talked about this last week as well. There are now two types of revolutionaries in France. You have the centrists who we're talking about right now, and their big fear is the left, the mobs, the radicals, that this populist violence that seems to have been bracketing everything that's really, it's been the thing that's kicked off everything in the revolution so far, the fall of the Bastille and the March on Versailles. Those were populist mob uprisings, you know, to differing degrees of violence. But the centrists who are now trying to preserve the Constitution of 1791 before it's even adopted, they're dead afraid of the left, of the Cordelier-led left, radical mobs just standing up and burning things down and murdering people. And then you have the leftists, right? The leftist radicals. So Georges Danton, Camille Desmoulins, Jean-Paul Marat. These guys are afraid of the external threat, which now the Comte de Provence has given absolute voice to. They're afraid of foreign counter-revolutionaries deciding that enough's enough. We're going to figure out a way to get some monarch who has an army to give it to us and march back in to France and end this. And remember, the Comte d'Artois has already tried this in the south of France. So these are the two types of revolutionaries. They are both justified in their fears, but their motivations because of those fears will be dramatically different. So we get to this populist break, which we have foreshadowed for a long time. We foreshadowed since the run up to the Estates General, when the electoral assemblies had to take into account the cahiers, which Brienne had asked everyone to write to say, hey, what's wrong, effectively, right? What do you think needs changed? And in these populist assemblies, the electors were not commoners. They were not sans-culottes. They were bourgeoisie. And these guys looked at the common complaints on the cahiers and said, well, these aren't Enlightenment ideals, effectively, like the general idea of food prices and the everyday need of the common person was basically thrown out the window. And we've cataloged along the way how there's been a lot of forks in the road where these upper middle class bourgeois pseudo elites now have decided to take the path of enlightenment versus the path of common sense and common cause at some time. Cherry, welcome in. Thank you for the resub, my friend. 13 months at tier 1, I appreciate it. Goes to DAV. Everything we bring in that's not a tier 3 sub here goes to disabled American veterans. Tier 3 revenue helps me pay for software licenses and things like that. Thank you very much. But we've done this slow walk, and I've tried to point out along the way, don't forget this is going to be important down the road. Well, the populist break is coming. It's coming very soon, and we're going to start to walk into it in detail. In the years since the Estates General and the storming of the Bastille, those who had assumed power in France had been steadily erecting a wall around themselves to protect their new regime from attacks from the left, because that's where their fear was. They were that type of revolutionary. They saw the left radical violent mob as the new threat. So on top of ignoring the cahiers, and now they've attacked the commoners' church pretty significantly, they started to put a wall politically, structurally, legally around this institution, which the common people don't agree with. And it starts in earnest back when these electoral assemblies, again, tossed those cailles aside, and it continued through the creation of the active passive citizenship distinction, where they disenfranchised the majority of the French population. They couldn't, they can't vote in these things because they're not old enough and don't pay enough in taxes, don't own enough property. And that Enlightenment notion of, in order to have a voice, you have to own a stake in the nation. And owning a stake was owning physical land, physical property. So the everyday day laborer or the person who worked in a bakery, they didn't see them as being an active citizen, and so they were disenfranchised. Out of curiosity, why do you call it the populist break? I would think the populist position was the radicals. It's the populist break from the current of the revolution so far. So if the revolution's a river and they've all been kind of rolling down it together, the populist side of things is breaking off now significantly. So there's a populist break from the center path of the revolution, which is to the Constitution of 1791. It's a good question. Thank you for asking for me to clarify. Well, that's why I call it the populist break. So, again, it continued through this active passive citizenship distinction. It was exacerbated further when they took that active passive dichotomy to the next step and said, now, to be in the National Guard, which started basically on the days running up to the storming of the Bastille, which was comprised of all sans-culotte commoners, now in order to be in the Guard, you've got to be an active citizen. And that was done again from the position of, well, you have to have a stake in things. Plus, if you have a stake in things, you're likely not to burn those things down. You're more likely to follow orders and maintain discipline. So the desire was to effectively push what they saw as rabble back out of the process. And in the process, it's going to backfire on them and create this second tornado. Louis doesn't help, right? Because the bourgeoisie have been slowly chipping away at their own foundation with all of these decisions. And then Louis runs up to that foundation with dynamite when he tries to run for it. So what's going to occur later today on the Champ de Mars? And for those of you that don't know what the Champ de Mars is, we've talked about it in the past, but if you look on the board right now, you will see a map of Paris in the bottom. And you will see a blue arrow pointing to an open field. That is the Champ de Mars. The Champ de Mars is where the Eiffel Tower is today in France. But what's going to occur there in July 1791 is going to be much more rooted in this rift that has been slowly, like a wound, just widening along the course of the conversation of this series, pretty much since we talked about how the Estates General were forming up until today. The flight to Varennes is the spark on a stack of just gunpowder that's been sitting there, right? It's the thing that falls on it and says, boom. So running through the spring and into the summer of 1791, the thing that was really at the heart of this rift that has been here the whole time, but the thing that was really ripping at it now was in the wake of the Bastille. Remember, the Paris electors had self-declared themselves to be the government. It's a great what if. And there's a ton of what ifs in the French Revolution. What would have been different if the king had not decided to flee? Who knows? And I think there's an opportunity to do some what ifs. Like, what if that domino falls, and do like a 30-minute what if at the end of the series to say, what would have been the dominoes that went through all of this had this one decision not or had been made, and then see what happens once you have the whole understanding of how we effectively get to Napoleon. Yeah, or if he had fled much earlier, like what if he had effectively abdicated while he was still in Versailles before, September 1790. All great what-if questions that all we can do is speculate on because he chose to run in June 1791. But again, at the heart of this rift that we're running into in the spring to summer of 1791, this rift that's this festering wound, that after the fall of the Bastille, when these Paris electors, again, who had self-declared themselves to be the government of Paris, and they are the ones that put the Guard together, Louis ratified that the day after, and they had put Jean-Sylvain Bailly in charge, right? and they placed Lafayette in charge of the Guard. And then from the moment Bailly had been put in power, because it was power, he was an Enlightenment guy, and I'm sure he's come off as a nice guy so far, but he was a scientist, he was a bourgeoisie member of the Third Estate, he still was handed the reins of power. And there's a great cliche quote about absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power does corrupt. It does corrupt people. And I'm not saying Bailly
Remember
became
to
a
clonk that
tyrant,
follow button.
but Bailly's walking into this job from the perspective of being a member of the Enlightenment, not thinking like a commoner. And so he started to consolidate this power base for himself, and he did so at the expense of the radical populists in Paris. And when the Paris Commune government was later populated with elected officials, they actually went out and had an election and brought them into the Commune government, replacing the stated electors who had just kind of said, hey, we're the assembly of Paris right now, and you have to listen to us. They actually did have elections and brought in people, but Bailly was still the mayor. But those people in the Paris Commune government, when those elections were held to populate the Paris, for lack of a better way to describe it, the Paris government assembly, they were only elected by the active citizens because that had been enacted at that point. So the majority of the population of Paris was disenfranchised. Jean-Sylvain Bailly. Yeah, I can spell it. Just ask me to zoom in, dude. Crap. There we go. I didn't want to do that. So Jean-Sylvain Bailly is this guy right here. Evening, Archie. You see it now? I don't care about stopping and zooming in. If you guys can't see the names, because I can see the names. I don't know how, I'm judging based off of the preview over here, how they look for you guys. You get the name? There we go. Alright, so we're going to go zoom back out. Actually, we can probably pull it off this way right now. We're still going to bring those guys over. Okay. I was looking at the wrong French dead dude. He's not dead. So back to what I was saying. Bailly is now in charge of a Paris Commune government, which has been elected in the winter of 1790, but only by the active citizens, which obviously pisses off all the, rest of the people who can't vote for him, passive citizens who have no voice in their government. And then this new group, still with Bailly and Lafayette at their heads, begin to do what they could do to neutralize the masses in Paris, as they were, Bailly and Lafayette were, of the type of revolutionary that's who they feared. They feared the people around them as the biggest threat to maintaining the revolution. They're dead now. Yes, Gilly. They're just not dead now. In our current narrative. We got a board of dead people. Because they started to work against Bailly, Lafayette, and this now elected Paris Commune government. They started to work against the commoners because they saw them as this threat, this violence that they didn't understand, and nor did they condone from the center politically of where the assembly and overall government was. They saw people just, and it is fair to say that there wasn't a whole lot of foreshadowing to a lot of the violence that would occur. You just wake up one day and boom, there it is. There's a mob and someone's dead. There was always that current, that menacing vibe in Paris at this time. Remember, where people were looking over their shoulders wondering which group of guys is going to be the one to knife them. But the large populist mob actions just seem to come out of nowhere. What will then be now? Soon.
No way!
Yes way. That was perfectly timed. So one such act of oppression as Bailly and the new the new Paris Commune government begins to try to put the radical momentum in a box is they did that thing where they took the Cordeliers section of Paris, which Desmoulins, Danton, and Fabre d'Eglantina, who's up there now too, they tried to put them in a box and absorbed their section into a larger Paris section when they redistricted, and it backfired on them, right? And we're going to talk about how bad that backfired on them. But in the spring of 1791, these activities by the Paris Commune government begin to kind of pick up steam. Father of what now? I'm going to zoom in on him when it's time. We're not there yet. It's the guy that's third from the left on the top next to Robespierre, Fabra d'Eglantina. We're going to give a little biography of him when we get to him. He's also one of the Cordelier members. We're going to kind of rewind the tape here in a little bit and kind of walk you through a little bit more detail about the Cordelier and Danton specifically. There it is, Fabra d'Eglantine. That's the guy's name. But in the spring of 1791, these repressive actions by the Paris Commune government started to pick up speed because those in power started to continue to see, they didn't start to continue, they continued to see this leftist radical commoner mob as a threat that wasn't going away. No worries, Rocket. And so they banned collective petitioning and mass assembling, right? So in this great glorious age where we have the Declaration of the Rights of Man ensuring liberty for all, the Paris Commune government says, here's an aspect of free speech you're not allowed to do anymore. No collective petitioning and no mass assembling. So they're restricting what we take in the American Bill of Rights as something very core. You know, the free assembly. And it's core to liberty in general. It's core to the concept of freedom, that you can gather with whoever you want outside of a pandemic and just do your thing. But they restricted both mass collective petitioning, meaning I can't have a petition where I'm going to get other people's names on it, and they banned mass assemblies. No, not so they couldn't go to the assembly. Assemblies of people, like your right to assemble and protest, Rocket. So like the idea of you getting into a group of 10 of your friends and grabbing your signs and walking down the street to say, I'm not happy about something, that type of assembly. Not the National Assembly. They didn't ban the National Assembly. They couldn't because they sit below it in terms of power, the structure of power in France. I'm talking about the fundamental rights of petitioning and the fundamental right to assemble. Those are the things that the Paris Commune government said, no more of that in the spring of 1791, right? And it was done again from the perspective of, well, if this group of people cannot now legally complain to us on paper collectively, that'll sure keep them quiet. And if they can't get into a group and march on some prison they don't like anymore because we said so, that'll keep them in line, right? Edicting is how the Paris Commune government approached trying to corral the mob, and guess what? It didn't work. Yeah, we'll see how that worked out. Not very well. A few weeks after they did this, though, after they banned collective petitioning and banned mass assembling, the National Assembly placed another far-reaching ban on worker associations. So we're talking about the proto-union, right? No more associations of workers who have a common cause banding together to fight for that cause, to organize around that cause. The idea that you ban a worker association means we're taking the old anachronistic guild structure and saying that's gone, that's not legal anymore, it's been illegal for a while anyway. But now, any ideas you guys have about having some kind of meeting somewhere in someone's house and throwing the label of, well, this is just a union meeting, sir, because you're planning to blow something up or raid something, that's illegal too. And the perspective of the government is we're keeping them from having meetings that could lead to insurrectionary activity. But they're, again, doing so in the name of restricting rights generally, right? They're restricting general rights in the name of preventing violence, which might happen in some sort of Minority Report, future-proofing, Patriot Act kind of way of doing business. And it doesn't work, because anytime that you have handed liberty to people and then try to take it back from them, especially as quickly as it's being done here, there's going to be a very nasty reaction to that. This is starting to cement the idea that the assembly doesn't necessarily stand for the people anymore. The middle of the assembly, right? Because remember who's got control of the assembly? The 1789ers do, right? We still have the extreme leftists of the Jacobins out there who certainly don't agree with any of this, but they're outvoted. They don't have control on the levers of power, so they can't stop what's happening. They should have said, yes, this is a party, sir, not a meeting or anything. That's actually interesting. When we get to the Russian side of history at the end of the 19th century, actually we get to 1848. That's exactly how they're going to do it, Rocket. Whenever revolution comes to Europe more broadly in the mid-19th century, they're going to have their meetings under the notion of we're having a large dinner party. And it works. It does work when they do it that way. So you predicted the future very nicely there. It's called the banquet meetings, and they will reoccur as the Russians go into their first revolution in 1905 because they template the idea because it worked, right? But right now these are commoners. They don't have that houses or the resources to have large parties. So their worker union meetings have just been banned by the government and said, no, you can't meet. And imagine in our modern society, like, I'm sure we all have our differing opinion on unions. I think workers' rights are important. I think collective bargaining is good. And I think that the ability of workers to come together to collectively bargain against behemoth companies is good. I think unions can be corrupt. I think it depends on who's in charge of them. But the concept of collective union bargaining is good because it keeps power centralized on behalf of employees. Imagine if we did that today, though. And, oh, wait a minute, states are doing that today. We have what's called the right to work law in some form in lots and lots of states, which dilutes union power. Except people weren't paying attention well enough to what they were up to, and now it's been in place so long, it's really hard to get out of a situation where you cannot negotiate your job except through single arbitration. It was done slyly, right, in our modern society, because the lesson was learned in the past that you just can't yoink it. You can't just walk up to somebody and say, stop doing that. It was instead very shadily stripped layer by layer off the can until there was no can, right? Or toward this a very flimsy can. It depends on your state, but that's the same concept. And I do like to make these relationships between the historical aspect of things and how it relates to today. And this is one big one where taking away the ability of workers to assemble and bargain, just because we think a small few of them might be planning nefarious things, we're going to take it away from everybody. It's the one bad apple spoils it for everyone's stupidity of logic, where we don't want to discriminate against workers because some of you are bad, most of you are good, because those guys are bad over there. No one can do it. It's dumb. But the National Assembly did it in the spring of 1791. They yoinked that right away from everybody. Gilly's spot on. Unionization is power, and those in power will always watch for people obtaining power. If they don't want them to have that power, they'll work against it. That's as simple as it gets. And that's why unions are diluted. So the next thing is that labor strikes were declared illegal at the same time by the assembly. So not only can you not unionize effectively, you cannot work together collectively as a group of workers. You cannot meet and plan collectively. You cannot strike. You cannot walk off the job jointly. You cannot plan to not be there as a group. So the two big things that would eventually become the core of the labor movement in the Industrial Revolution are just yoinked right here by the National Assembly. And again, this is not the industrial era, right? We do not have mass industrialization in the late 1790s. But you can see the seeds that workers were already trying to start to unionize, and that at the same time, those unions were being corrupted because unions were being used in 1791 as excuses to plan insurrection. And that's why the assembly took their actions, though I don't think they thought it through all the way, because all it does is say, hey, the 80-90% of you who are pretty decent folk following the law, boink, in the eye to you too. How do you feel now? That's the effect it has. The lower class leadership is just smacked in the face by all of this, right? They take all these new things rolling out of Paris and rolling out of the assembly from now these fancy pants bourgeoisie. And remember in 1788 and 1789, it was fancy pants aristocrats. So there's this, well, they're not us. Like Gilly just said, I get the feeling that the assembly is not working on behalf of the people anymore. That sentiment's real, where these common folk are looking up and saying, how are those new guys in charge different from those guys who used to be in charge? Because it's the same thing down here for us. It hasn't changed very much. You're telling us we don't matter. You're telling us we're not worth giving the vote to. So our only recourse, to a degree, is to act out with civil disobedience. Now, civil disobedience and violence are two different things. But when you start whacking the common folk on the head, like has happened here, and basically shown a mirror up to the past and said it's pretty much the same thing. I don't know what's so great about this and why they want to maintain this. These people start to break off. But of course, yes, protesting has been banned. So how do you do civil disobedience in a peaceful way if you cannot protest because mass assemblies have been banned? And it's a series of really, I wouldn't say dumb decisions, but we have the benefit of hindsight, right? Like, I would assume that the majority of the people who watch this stream are, lower or middle class people. I would assume that most of them are not sitting in the mid six figures and making a ton of income because they're out at fancy dinner parties, and I'm not. So we have a perspective on this where we go, because we've seen the progression of history to a degree to understand how we got here. But in that moment, the bourgeoisie of France who are in charge of the assembly don't have that frame of reference. They don't understand why the commoners aren't happy with the little bit they have gained. And they have gained some things, right? Feudalism is dead. Other things declared in the Declaration of the Rights of Man are good, but they're being disenfranchised, and the enlightened bourgeoisie don't get why that is upsetting people. Perm, cough, perm. Mention a rich person, there he is. I said most. But it comes off as this, meet the new boss. I've said this before. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? Someone comes in promising change, and it's exactly the same on the factory floor. And that's kind of where these guys are. The common folk of France are in a position where they don't feel much or enough has changed. So by the time the king is making his escape attempt, right, the leaders of the lower class in Paris had already concluded that Bailly and Lafayette were not actually leaders of their revolution anymore, but now the enemies of the revolution, because the common people of Paris and across France wanted things to keep going. They wanted more out of this. And you have the centrist 1789ers who are throwing up a wall and putting up defenses around the idea of what the Constitution of 1791 will be and saying, no, stop right here. So now this is where that fork is, where those centrists are saying, nope, enough right here. Revolution stops here because we celebrated the Fête de Fédération and that was supposed to be it, right? And the rest of the people were saying, no, you got what you want out of this, but we haven't. And so what used to be this unity between the sans-culottes and the bourgeoisie, that unity that spurred everything leading up to the Estates General, which allowed the bourgeoisie to grab control as the Third Estate and take over and declare the National Assembly, that unification of power is now split in two paths. So the core of this lower class leadership that is organizing against the 1789ers and the bourgeois centrists, they found themselves within the Cordeliers, and then the Cordeliers section, and then the Cordeliers Club after the Cordeliers section is kind of redistricted in that attempt to consume it. And the big guy in charge of things running forward. We've talked about Desmoulins. We've talked about him at the Bastille giving that speech. We've talked about Marat. Marat's kind of, is he in the Cordeliers Club or not? It's kind of a fence, who knows. And Fabre d'Églantine is there. But Georges Danton is this giant. He is a giant of a man. He is going to take this populist energy forward and take it to the next step. He's going to combine it with the radical leftist energy of the Jacobins into a juggernaut. So we're going to get into Danton, and we're going to get into the lower class leaders, and we're going to give a biography of this big man, the giant Georges Danton, when we come back. But as I said, I wanted to talk about something else as we approach the first break, and we're coming up on that 7:45 Eastern Time mark here in the show. So the first thing is this. As always, when we get the money in, we always show the money. So from the July to August period for Fixers Heavy Metal History, we raised $185 for disabled American veterans through your subs, through your bits, and through your pack buys. And that brings us up to $1,303 to date this year. Lifetime, we were closing on $2,000, 1943. This week's a tough week for veterans. It's a tough week for me. I know that for a lot of you, when you read the news this week that Afghanistan fell, it was just a news headline. And you may follow it with interest, but unless you have been there or you have cared for someone who has been there, this has been a very, very hard week for us. As a generation of people who served there in the wake of 9/11, which was 20 years ago. And you need to make sure that you are checking in on the veterans you know. We have a lot of support the troops statements out there. And I will attest to the fact that veterans are a proud group. And if someone asks me how I'm doing, I'm going to say fine the very first time you ask me. Ask again. Make sure they're doing okay. Because this has been an extremely hard week for us, where we're asking a lot of questions about why did we go, and why did the friends who we lost, what were they lost for? And it puts a lot of people on a bad fence. So make sure that you're checking in on the veterans you know this week, please. You know that the veterans cause is extremely important to me. I lost friends there. I have friends who are not taking this well. I know I've exchanged messages with plenty of veterans this week just saying, you okay? Because there is an internal understanding that when I ask you, are you okay, you know why I'm asking. But there is a staleness to the concept of, well, I support the troops. Really give a crap and ask. As we roll into break, we're going to keep up a tradition here. We haven't played a song during the stream in a while. We're going to play a Five-Finger Death Punch song. I really ask you to pay attention to what's going on in this song, and then we'll go to break right after the song. So thank you for the time. You guys have been fantastic in our small effort to try to raise money for veterans. I hope it continues. I'm working with DAV to try to get them on Tiltify so we can have full-blown drives. But this is an extremely wrenching week for my generation of veterans. So, not to bring it down, but we're going to bring it down for a second. We're going to play some music, and we're going to go to break right after. So, here we go.
Just like me, what have I done, and who have I become? I saw the devil today, and he looked a lot like me. I looked away, I turned away, arms wide open, I stand alone.
remember to clonk that follow button. This is a list of organizations. If you feel inclined to help, you want to get involved, you know somebody who needs help, you simply want to contact them to donate some spare money you have in these times where not a lot of us have spare money. You can play this back in the VOD if you need to. These are websites and phone numbers. I implore you, if you're a veteran and you need help, please contact me. Contact one of these organizations and make sure you do not do anything stupid right now as we watch what we worked for fall. If you know somebody who needs help, please work with them to get it. I cannot stress enough how important this is to me and what a sacred obligation it is to those who sent others to fight for their freedom. So please take your time, roll through this list in the VOD, and make sure that you are reaching out to those people who you know whom have served. It's important to me, it's important to others in here, but it's important for us as a society to take care of those people who went out there to do a job that is impossibly difficult. It does extremely brain-changing things to you that if you haven't fought, you don't understand. But please take the time at least to reach out and ask, are you okay? And then ask again, are you okay? And make sure, especially this week, please, that we're taking care of those veterans we know exist in our own midst. I thank you all for sitting through this. This is my platform. This is extremely important to me. And this is a very, very significant link for veterans. We'll roll into the break, and I'll talk to you all in a few minutes. And again, thank you very much for being here tonight, for everything you've done for disabled American veterans so far as we continue to roll forward with Fixer's Heavy Metal History. I really can't express my own sincere admiration for what this community does enough. Thank you all. Again, you can replay that list during the VOD. We'll be right back.
Gentlemen, we're history.
Another soul battered and broken, cast aside like a spent torch.
So yeah, when I turned the song scene off, it toggled my camera off, and I did that out of sequence, which is why you got to watch me walk around for a little while during my BRB. Yeah, I was just kind of getting my head clear after all that. Again, I appreciate you all listening to it. There's a reason my camera was not on while I was doing it, because it's not an easy thing to talk through. But again, what we've done here in this small, very, tight group of friends, on top of 10 grand for Extra Life to buy a new neonatal intensive care monitor through Omega's efforts, and this effort here to try to raise some money for disabled American veterans, I really can't say enough. And I appreciate y'all listening just for about 4 minutes while we went through that. But we'll move on. 20 tier 1 gift subs. Dragon, Serious JT, Wayne June 1, Schneid, Squirrel, Iron Gamer, Superiority Corp. Let's see, Deucen Lepke, Localori, Alex Tailson. That's actually someone I used to work with. Mangry Gamer, The Fort Keeple, Snackless Kerbal, Pixel Me Sane. That one I can't pronounce. Landetta Sama, Ulti, Five Fist. Not saying that one. 10 more gift subs. Carnival picked one up. Adam versus Everything. Thank you all. Diablo, Platty, 2 for 5, R4D7, that's JC's bot. Emoe Joey, Mannered Hydra, Tort, Toofy, Stormy, Elicure, all great. Like I said, sub here, that helps. Donate money directly to DAV or whatever avenue you want to do it. But every little tiny bit helps. The big poignant thing in that video was that the VA doesn't have the resources, and it's dependent upon organizations to reach out and take care of vets. So I don't want to labor the point. You guys know what matters. You want to go through that list again, it'll be in the VOD. Or you can just go watch that Five Finger Death Punch video, because I didn't alter it at all. That is Five Finger Death Punch video. They put that information in there. They care about veterans, and they really are all about it at their concerts and in their songs. So we'll return back to the episode here now and get back on track. We were talking about, as we rolled into the break, what's the name of the song? Wrong Side of Heaven. Wrong Side of Heaven. So before the break, we were talking about how this fork had happened, right, between the two types of revolutionaries, and how the bourgeois centrists in the assembly and elsewhere kind of wanted things to stay where they are, and how the Cordeliers, and we have kind of been foreshadowing them and talking about them a little bit. But we started to talk about, we're going to talk about more in depth about their origins, organization, and we're going to do so through the man, the giant, Georges Danton. Georges Danton is up there in terms of French Revolution history importance with Maximilien Robespierre, which is a name that people know. They run into that name every once in a while, they just kind of bounce off of the name Robespierre and go find out he was involved in the French Revolution. Danton is up there. He's up there with Lafayette. He's up there with the king to a degree, but he is hugely important. And Danton was this big guy, right? We have looked at his picture, upper row, second from the left, for a long time now. He's just been there. But he was a big guy. Like, he stood a head taller and was twice as round with a big barrel chest than the average everyday person in Paris. And he shared that kind of stand-outedness with Mirabeau. Remember, Mirabeau was a big guy, and he dressed ostentatiously, and he wanted the attention. Well, Danton probably gets to the point where, he does get to the point where he wants that attention. He was born in Champagne in the east of France in 1759, which makes him 32 years old at this point in our narrative. And as a child, he survived a bout of smallpox, which left his face all pockmarked. And then he survived 2 kicks to the face from a bull. So as he grew and grew and grew into this great hulk of a human being, he was, even by his own admission, a pretty ugly brute due to this early childhood scarring. Oh yeah, the guy whose pick bothers me. When I was listening to Mike Duncan talk about Georges Danton, he commented about how he had a biography of Danton on his end table, right? Because he's reading it to prepare for his own material. And That book, by the way, that Mike Duncan's writing about Lafayette will be out at the end of this month. It's called Hero of Two Worlds. 500 pages on Lafayette, coming out very soon if you want to really go down the rabbit hole on Lafayette. But Mike Duncan commented that his wife was seriously put off by the photo of Danton, the picture of Danton that's on the cover of this biography, and he is not a pretty man. So as he grew up ugly by his own admission, and his mother sent him off to a seminary for studies when he was about 12 years old. And he endured it for a while, the tediousness of studying at a seminary, but when he came home on his first break, he effectively refused to go back. And so his mom, and he's not bourgeois, he's kind of middle class family. His mother arranged for another school for him to attend called, it's run by an organization called the Oratorians, and this is a Catholic organization. It's a Catholic order, which we'll get into what a Catholic order means, but it's a group within the Catholic Church that embraced and taught most of the Enlightenment thinking of the day. So he got an Enlightenment education. They didn't teach the Enlightenment side where it kind of leans toward atheism, but he got the liberty, Voltaire, Montesquieu side of things when he was in school. The school was small, but it was here that Danton discovered most of the classical writers, and I mean classical writers, like Greek classical writers, that would become his heroes, and most notably is Cicero from ancient Rome. And if you don't know who Cicero was a member of the Senate of Rome in the days that the Roman Republic fell, the Julius Caesar era. He was the contemporary of Caesar, except in that same era in Roman history, there was another dichotomy within the Senate between populists and conservatives who didn't want to see progress go forward. And Cicero sat in the middle of that group. He was the great orator. He was the great speaker. And Cicero was the swing element between these two factions in the Roman Senate. And this guy, Cicero, was Danton's greatest hero. Thank you very much there, Gilly. If you can, though, go buy that book from a local bookstore. Keep a local bookstore in business right now. Local bookstores are struggling. So if you can go out to a local bookstore that has a way to order online or just walk in, order the books there. But that is the book. It is due out very soon. I know my copy, I have to check in on it because I did order locally. But the thing that set Danton apart in school, well, while he was very good at speaking, and of course he is, he wants to be like Cicero, who is a top 3 public speakers of all time. That one right there, there's the link, bookshop.org. Go there and get the book. Thank you very much, Gilly. But Danton was an excellent public speaker. He had a steel trap for memory. Like, he could remember things that were said to him like nothing. But he struggled to make sense of words on the page. If he heard that same passage read out loud, he'd retain it, almost, verbatim, retain it, perfectly quoting it. But if he tried to read it, or whatever of it he could read, it just slipped away from him. And Danton was, because of we can look at this and go, he was probably dyslexic, right? No one's ever confirmed it. There's no diagnosis on paper, but based on the fact that he couldn't read but could remember everything and speak very well, he was probably dyslexic. And it's very possible that this memory he has, this steel trap memory, this can retain everything memory, is actually an emergent biological development to compensate for the fact that he was dyslexic. So there's no confirmation that he had a photographic memory, but it functioned in that manner based on everything that I've read about the guy. He could just literally recount things based on a reading disability, but not a cognitive disability. I think that makes sense. Yep. From the stories of a kindergarten teacher. Thank you, Ari. So his teacher simply chastised him, though, right? Here he is going to kind of use Billy Madison as the joke, though. He couldn't read well. And so the teachers chastised him for being lazy, which was not fair in the context of he doesn't have a cognitive disability. He just has a reading disability. But it is fair because Danton was also the kind of kid who liked to skip class and go to swim and play cards with his friends, even as a teenager. So there is some truth to the fact that there's some reasoning behind why his teachers thought he might be lazy beyond the fact that he couldn't read well. When he graduates school, Danton seems to think the law is the best, surest path to a better life for this common mid-tier, middle-class provincial with a pretty decent head on his shoulders. He's a really smart guy. So he talks his way into a job with a Paris law firm in 1780, so 11 years prior to what we're talking about contemporarily in the French Revolution. He had horrible writing samples, right? Because he couldn't read so well, he couldn't read well, so he couldn't write well. But he talks his way into a job as a law clerk. And Danton's bosses, after they hire him, realize he's no good for office work because he can't push papers. So they sent him down to the Palais Royal. And the Palais Royal is where, guess what, the Parlement operated out, the big judicial center. And Danton goes down there, and his job for this law firm is to observe court proceedings and then come back to the law firm and report on everything he heard and saw. And because of his memory, his ability to recount verbatim what he hears, he shines in this role. He's able to recall with perfect accuracy everything he hears. And he comes back and gives a absolute precise accounting for everything that happens judicially down there. It was like they sent a tape recorder in. And also, due to his size, at this point in history, he's at least 6 feet, which is tall for the time. It's tall today, but it's tall for the time. And he's, again, extremely barrel-chested and just ugly. He's disfigured, for lack of a better way to describe him. He's memorable. So he becomes recognizable and a visible fixture within the Paris legal scene in the 1780s. Everyone sees the big giant coming down to sit and listen every day for several years. So after 3 years of doing this as a clerk, he goes home and he passes the bar. And he comes back to the firm and they bring him in as a junior partner. 3 years to go from clerk to passing the bar to partner in a law firm. That's pretty quick. Even in those times, it was pretty quick. So in this new job as now a full-blown lawyer, Danton makes the rounds of the after-hours wine bars in Paris because he's not a clerk anymore. He's going to the Palais de Justice. He's arguing the law, and then he's walking out. Yeah, the bar is an ancient exam. He walks out of the Palais de Justice at the end of the day, and he starts hanging out in the Paris wine bars. And it's here that he meets Camille Desmoulins in 1787. And these two guys, so the top two, left and Danton's right next to him, those two guys, they form very, very quick, firm friendship. And they're a fairly ridiculous group, right? It's like, here's Danton, the masterous, boisterous, sometimes loudmouth guy, and Desmoulins, who's slender and sometimes timid and who's a writer. Remember, Danton's an excellent speaker, and Desmoulins is an excellent writer, there's some irony in there. Probably not, because the questions aren't the same state to state. Depends on the state, which state you pass the bar in. To answer Rocket's question in chat. So these two guys, Desmoulins and Danton, they share this passion for the old Greek and Roman masters. The same thing that was Danton's passion in school is that he shares that with Desmoulins. And they were so both just bursting with energy to get out and do something. They didn't know what it was yet, but they wanted to do something. And they did not know what in 1787 they would do, but with the monarchy suffering the very public financial problems that we talked about during the broken regime era of the series, it feels like a podcast sometimes, they saw that there would be an opportunity to do something soon. So shortly after meeting Desmoulins, Danton gets married, purchases a position on what is called the King's Council, which is a specialized and lucrative branch of the judicial system in the old Ancien regime. I could make a podcast out of this. You're not wrong. I got all the notes. The seller of this seat, and remember, we're back talking about in the Ancien regime where Danton joins the King's Council. So we're talking about venal office seats. The seller of the seat wanted to retire and sold the seat to Danton as sort of a consolation prize, because at the time, Danton had been courting the same young heiress that the guy he bought the seat from was. So the guy who had the seat retires and says, well, you didn't get the girl. how about you just buy the seat for me? And basically the opportunity to buy the seat was the consolation prize, and Danton buys it. And then he's able to move his family over to the left bank of the Seine, which puts him right into the heart of the Cordeliers section of Paris at the time. So over the next few years, Danton's reputation as a fantastic orator, just speaker, he can speak, just grows. And with the political climate of Paris and France heating up, question, is this the same seat the double agent had in an episode or two, a guy that died of natural causes? No, completely different thing. The King's Council is just a specialized piece of what formed the entire justice system in the Ancien regime. It wasn't the Parlement. It was different. It's the same seat the double agent had an episode ago that died of natural causes. No, Mirabeau did not have a seat on the King's Council, because the King's Council that I'm referring to is a pre-revolutionary council that was just simply a part of the outdated judicial system. Mirabeau was a paid advisor, so he wasn't within the ministry, so therefore didn't serve any official capacity. So we're talking about Georges Danton as simply having a normal public job on the King's Council, which was simply a part of the old Ancien regime judicial system. Nothing to do with what Mirabeau was doing many years later, or several years later. But again, Danton moves across the Seine into the Cordeliers section. He continues to grow his reputation as an orator and a lawyer. And then within the escalating climate, right? Because everything, if we go back to think about how we got to the National Assembly, is just rising temperature in Paris along with the rest of France. He just gives these ad hoc and impromptu street orations where he's just speaking, because that was a form of entertainment back then, but he's really good at it. And people know him, again, because he stands out like Mirabeau had. So when the Estates General were called in 1788, 1789, he did not have the time, or more importantly, the resources to stand for election as a third estate delegate. He had taken this job on the King's Council, and the cost of obtaining that seat, remember we bought, the lower class would buy up to try to buy up into the nobility. Well, Danton was on that path. He had bought up into a more upper crust, on the verge job, but the cost of doing so made it so that he couldn't run for election, because remember, all the delegates in the assembly are still paying their own way. They have been paying their own way for 2 years now, and they are still paying for their own food and their own lodging, because the nation's not paying that bill, and Danton didn't have the money. He didn't have the money to do that, so he couldn't go and be a delegate, and he knew it. He had borrowed really heavily to be in a position to purchase his seat. Well, hey, do you want to be a third estate delegate to be completely ignored? I don't get that at all, because the third estate delegates are who are running the show right now, along with the 1789ers in the assembly. I don't get that joke. They are now, yeah. But he wasn't buying into a third estate seat. He was buying, the King's Council was just basically part of the legal system. He was buying a seat in the legal system, which was running at the time. If I'm muddying the waters on the King's Council, because that is what it was called, we're talking, he bought that seat in the 1780s, before there was a revolution. So that by the time there was the Estates General being called, he couldn't participate, because he had bought his way into the judiciary effectively as more of a judge. And so he didn't have the money. So I didn't mention that he had the time resources to buy the third estate delegate during the Estates General because he lost the seat. No. Okay, there we go. I got it. Back to the track here. The long story short is Danton did not get involved with the Estates General because he couldn't afford to, because he had borrowed money to buy the King's Council seat. So despite not being a delegate, Danton was still obviously very interested in politics, and he began to refashion himself as the champion of the people, right? The people in this case, though, mean the lower class sans-culotte. He's not trying to represent the bourgeois assembly members, because he's not a part of that. Yeah, the best joke's the one you have to explain. So he begins to restyle himself as the National Assembly begins to take form, and he moved into this new persona of champion of the people while working side by side with Desmoulins. And they made a great team. Because one's a fantastic writer and one's a fantastic speaker. This is one of the great ironies of history, though, that when the speech was given in the days leading up to the fall of the Bastille, where someone stands on a coffee table in the Palais Royal and gives the speech of their life and points to the army marching through the gates, because they were marching through the gates, and points a pistol at his chest and just gives this great oration. It's not Danton, but Desmoulins, the writer. It's just one of those things. The one day he just spoke out of his mind. With Paris, though, up in arms, leading
Remember
into
to clonk that follow button.
It was a table in the Palais Royal. It wasn't a soapbox. It was a table. He got up on a table. You can go back and read the tape on that one. I know for a fact that's a table. But I don't want to get bogged down here in dissecting the minutia of something that occurred 9 episodes ago, so I can try to keep the flow going here. You got to put a smiley face or something at the end of the jokes, otherwise I don't know they're jokes. So with Paris up in arms, leading into and during this insurrection that was spurred by Desmoulins. Remember, Desmoulins is the one that got them all to go out into the theaters and gather the mob that night, and that momentum carried over into the successive days, where, Les Invalides was hit, and then the Bastille was hit. It was Desmoulins' speech that was one of the major catalyzers of that got it all rolling. In the environment that Desmoulins started, Danton appoints himself captain of a self-declared militia unit. So we're talking, summer 1789. But this militia unit missed the storming of the Bastille. They weren't present. And this really, really bothered Danton, the champion of the people, that his militia unit wasn't there. So what does he do? They went back to the Bastille the next day. July 15th, 1789, Danton and his ragtag, not a part of the National Guard militia, walks back to the Bastille, demands the new governor of the Bastille let him in to inspect the premises, and then when the new governor says, I'm not letting you or anyone else in, Danton, the governor said, I'm not letting you or anyone else in based on the orders of the Paris Commune government, because now that's a thing. Danton removes the governor of the Bastille at gunpoint, marches him down to the Hotel de Ville as a traitor to the people, right? So here he is, Georges Danton, trying to be a big boy in the revolution, misses the Bastille with a militia unit that he's put together, goes back the next day to basically say, and I was here too, takes the governor, appointed by the new government, drags him down to that new government, and those Paris electors look at Danton and say, what the heck are you doing? They rip him down for it. They say, you're an idiot, and they let the governor go with apologies. And you might think that Danton was acting stupid here, but he was too smart to be really this stupid. He knew exactly what he was doing, and it was not being imbecilic. He was getting street cred for his new role that he put himself in as the revolutionary leader of the Cordeliers section of Paris. And it's from that point forward. Yeah, he's reaching for legitimacy. Exactly. He's getting street cred. So from that point forward, Danton is pretty much at war with the Paris Commune government. He created the conflict by going into the Hotel de Ville with the new governor of the Bastille and saying, here's a traitor, getting them to say, no, he's not, you're dumb, get out of here. He manufactured the conflict that day. So Danton finds himself elected as president of something called the Cordeliers Assembly. And this body, this new body that represents the Cordeliers section of Paris, decrees that no decision of the Paris Commune government is enforceable unless the Cordeliers Assembly ratifies it. So now you have this, this Paris Commune government. At that point, no one's been elected to it, but later on they will be, and they're, deciding what to do. And then there's Danton and his guys down in the Cour d'Allié saying, if we don't agree with you, we're not going to ratify that, and that's not law. It's a microcosm of what's happening at the stage between Paris and the Assembly. Now you have Paris with its own bunch of even more radical people working inside of the city. Yes, that was disturbed. 10,000 fists in the air. With Danton as the public speaking face of the Cour d'Allié and Desmoulins, they start, as a writer, they start a successful weekly paper, and they start pushing out the shared agenda of the Cour d'Allié. Now, this is not Voice of the People, which is Jean-Paul Marat's paper. They have their own paper. And they're soon joined, Camille Desmoulins and Georges Danton, by another person in this inner circle of the Cour d'Allié. This long, struggling actor and dramatist named Fabre d'Eglantina. And today is the first day we are talking about d'Eglantina, so we're going to go up here and have a look at him. This guy, I did it again, and I don't want to do it that way. Hey, look at that. I ruined the thing I wanted to do. Well, you know what? We'll delete it. This guy right here, Fabre d'Eglantina. I should have locked that. He joins Danton and Desmoulins. Love his floofy fake hair. It's funny how many of them wore wigs. d'Eglantina, again, was an actor, a playwright, and he suddenly found his calling by inventing an entirely new genre of revolutionary theater, which is like come to the theater and see plays that are talking about revolutionary themes. And he believed that it would be just as important to overturning the Ancien regime and then pushing the revolution forward as all the public speeches and newspapers or the direct political action. He believed getting people into the theater to see this revolutionary theater genre, you could see it as kind of being a proto-form of the propaganda reels that were deployed to great effect in the mid-20th century movie theaters. I'm more curious if I could pull it off his head and I could set it on fire. Probably. But d'Eglantina kind of has this other aspect of this core group where Desmoulins is the writer and Danton is the outspoken, noticeable front man. He get out there speaking and remembering everything. And d'Eglantina kind of comes in as almost the side PR guy, where he can get the message out in a way that no one else is really thought about right now, which is where does everybody in Paris go to get their entertainment? The theater. They sit in these theaters. They go to the Jacobin Club, but they're all seeing some sort of performance. And if we could start slipping into these performances outright propaganda messages about the revolution and where we wanted to go via the performances, that was his angle. So d'Eglantina, Desmoulins, and Danton. Now, it's great that they all have D's because it makes it easy for alliteration to speak all their names in sequence. They form the core of this Cour d'Allié club that we've been talking about the whole time. Like all the stuff that has been coming out of the Cour d'Allié section has largely been coming out of them. Marat's there too, but Marat's his own thing. But in this moment, none of them were as well known. Desmoulins, Danton, d'Eglantina, they were not as well known in Paris as Jean-Paul Marat. Marat had never stopped. He was pumping out his increasingly insane credos. Remember, he started to advocate outright murder of those who stood in opposition to the continued momentum of the revolution. He was now pumping out papers, and again, he's the sole writer, editor, and publisher. There's probably printers there working for him where he, to set the type for what he's writing, but he pretty much establishes the daily newspaper with his tempo. And his operation for the Voice of the People was based out of the basement of a building in the Cour d'Allié section. So they all get tied together. Danton, Desmoulins, d'Eglantina, and Jean-Paul Marat, they all are this ulcer for the Paris Commune government that's just sitting there coming out of the Cour d'Allié section. Well, they've hit him once, and they're going to hit him again. Danton, nor really much the rest of the leadership at Cour d'Allié cared for Marat personally, right? But the force of Marat's onslaught, this political onslaught, was undeniable. It was a force of will to be doing what Marat was doing, whether it was crazy or not. And that level of will to do as much as he was doing probably is an indication of how crazy he was, because he was crazy. We're going to get to how crazy, because he's going to get crazier, but he's crazy. And he's, I want to keep these videos clean for YouTube, but there are so many words I want to use about what I know about Jean-Paul Marat. Marat was leading that onslaught, though, right, against Bailly and Lafayette and the national establishments at the assembly level. He was just railing at them because he saw the momentum stalling, and he was the one everyone knew. So the Paris Commune government basically has enough.
Wait, what hole did I forget?
I don't know. But the Paris Commune government just has enough of Marat. And they send 300 bailiffs and guardsmen on an arrest warrant in July 1790 to pick him up, to pick up Marat and put an end to it. And Danton is the one who effectively is standing at the door to the building saying, I can have 20,000 members of this section, the Corelli section, here to take you out if you go after Marat. And he was effectively buying time. You have to remember that Danton didn't like him personally, but the message that Marat was doing, the general 3,000-foot view message was Lafayette bad, Bailly bad, Assembly bad, Commune government bad. And these are all things Danton wanted momentum behind. Whether he agreed with the details of what he was saying, like kill people who disagree with us, he did want the sentiment on the street to be the momentum of the revolution must continue forward. And it was really stalled from 1790 July to 1791 July. So he did. He protected him. Yes, he did. He protected him at the door, saying, hey, 300 bailiffs and guardsmen, you can't search this building for him, even though I know he's down in the basement. He didn't say that part. He bought time threatening to bring 20,000 people from the section down on them. And Marat got out. And then by the time that he saw the high sign that Marat's out, he's like, hey, you know what? Go ahead and have a look. And Danton was bluffing. He couldn't bring that many people down that fast. But it bought Marat time to escape. You're going to see a couple more times where I've intentionally left Danton's name out of it so I can neatly place him into events that you are already aware of. This event where Danton basically buys time for Marat to get away was the key event that led to Bailly and the Paris Commune government to redistrict the Corelli. The Corelli leadership, again, just took over that much larger section. They were the powerhouse politically within the populist movement, and they basically were just given more area to work in politically. So when the first real elections, remember those first real elections I talked about for the Paris Commune government were held, Georges Danton was a top vote getter to be in that assembly at the Hotel de Ville. But being a little bit of a snake, Jean-Sylvain Bailly had inserted language as mayor into the election rules that if you were elected, the other sections of Paris had to confirm you as a delegate, meaning even though you came out of the Corelli and the Corelli elected you, the rest of the sections must also affirm you. And because of that, only 600 of the 600,000 people that were living in Paris at the time, only about 14,000 had to vote. And the active passive rules were in place. So these were the bourgeoisie, and none of them wanted anything to do with the ogre of the people, Georges Danton, and they refused to confirm his seat. They kept him out of it. Even though he had won a seat, they refused to affirm it, and they kept him out of the government. So Danton being barred from this position in the Commune government really upset him. It really upset anybody. Not only did I win legitimately, now you, through this weird power play, have kept me out of participating in government. Yeah, that could create a grudge bad. So he goes back to the Corelli Club and begins to plot revenge. So in order to start networking with those in power in September 1790, Desmoulins, d'Eglantina, and Georges Danton join the Jacobins, which is why I had that nice box, because the Jacobins are now that entire top row and everybody on the second row except Marat. So you can see how the radical left side of the Jacobin Club just had an infusion of extreme radical energy thrown into it into the fall and winter of 1790. So the Cordelier Club still operates as a thing, but they are now also largely a part of the Jacobins. Interesting. It's going to get more interesting by the end of the episode. Yeah, we'll take Marat's bigger picture as a separation. It's kind of offset. Well, they are the extremist group, right? And the Jacobins at this time they had some people that very much agreed with the Cordeliers. They were just as extreme. And then you had the more left-center leaning Jacobins like Duport, Barnave, and Lamette, who weren't in line with Desmoulins, Danton, d'Eglantina, and Robespierre. But that's what the Jacobins was, right? Remember, the Jacobins used to count Mirabeau and Lafayette and Talleyrand. They used to be Jacobins too, and then when things went too far left for that group, they became the Center Party, the Society of 1789. Now, the Jacobins have gotten a new infusion of leftist radical energy, and who's more toward the center? Barnave, Duport, Lamette. That's going to play out again until they move the goalposts. Exactly. So this was all done to network. But Desmoulins, if you remember, was a classmate of Robespierre. They didn't travel in the same circles, but they attended school together. And Danton had also met Robespierre before, and he didn't really care for him personally either.
Shame! 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 Shame!
Shame. You tried to steal. But Danton didn't care for Robespierre that much personally either, but he couldn't object to his politics. Robespierre's politics lined very much up to the edge of the radical left. He wasn't all the way left like probably Danton was, but he was pretty much there. So in January 1791, Danton finally gets elected to an official position in the new government. He obtains a seat in the newly created governing board of the Department of Paris, which was part of the realignment process where French provinces became departments. So he becomes a member of the governing board of the Department of Paris, which you would think Department of Paris sits above Paris Commune government. It's supposed to be above the Paris Commune government, but the Paris Commune government was still pretty much acting rogue. They were still kind of just doing their own thing and not listening to anybody. So it came with real little power for Danton, but the important thing that it did come with is Danton finally has a steady government salary. He doesn't have to go out and work. He can show up for his phantom job that doesn't really do much and focus that money and his effort back on his radical politics. Yeah, you are now on the board of we don't listen to you, but we're going to pay you to sit there and so we can ignore you. That's pretty much what it was. So around the same time that he got this seat, Danton started to work up a relationship with Mirabeau. They were both big, great, boisterous behemoths. Danton admired the status and respect that Mirabeau had, and they started to try to build a partnership. But unfortunately, and in another one of those great what-ifs, what would have happened if these two political opportunists, for lack of a better way to describe them, had built a really good dynamic duo power structure with Desmoulins behind them writing everything? It would have been something. But Mirabeau dies, and that budding partnership just doesn't go anywhere. It's just one of those, man, that'd have been... Woo! Sass Mita, thank you for the follow. Welcome into Fixtures Heavy Metal History. We're about halfway through the episode talking about the lead up to the Massacre of the Champ de Mars. Through all of this, and up to the point of the flight to Varennes, which we talked about last week, Danton was in his heart still a monarchist. He still believed in the royal family and the place that the king had in government. This was actually one of the few political differences up to the summer of 1791 that Danton had with Desmoulins, because Desmoulins was a strict Republican. He wanted to get rid of the royal family entirely. He wanted representative government top to bottom, no active passive nonsense, and they didn't agree on this. It's not minor, it's a major point. However, as the rumors began to swirl, we talked about those rumors of a plot that didn't exist last week, of this potential royal family flight for the border, Danton began to really doubt and wonder if the king really could ever be trusted, because he was believing the rumors. And here's another thing. Danton, remember when the royal family, in the lead up to the flight, had tried to go on their Holy Week vacation to Saint-Cloud, which was, 10 kilometers outside the city. They had gone there countless times, and a mob comes to stop them from going? Guess who was leading that mob? Georges Danton. He was at the head of that populist mob that kept the royal family from leaving the Tuileries Palace that day. Didn't mention it last week because it makes more sense now as we go through his life up and get him into the show. But he was one of the lead actors gathering the mob that prevented the royal family from leaving because he had bought into the rumors. In the aftermath of that confrontation that day, when they prevented the carriage from being, the carriage's ability to get out of the city and get to Saint-Cloud, Danton goes down to the Jacobins and tells the Jacobins that Lafayette had been dying to fire into the crowd to clear a way for the royal coach to get out. And the only reason that the carriage or the guard didn't fire is because they refused the order from Lafayette. But Lafayette never gave an order to fire. So here's Danton teetering on the edge politically when he wakes up on the morning of June 21st, 1791, and he was told that the king had made an attempt to run for Montmédy. They thought the border, even though it's pretty much the border. This moment pushes Danton over the edge and completely realigns his purpose. Up to this point, we've discussed that he operated as a political opportunist, generally disturbing things here and there as he operated for the primary purpose of raising his own reputation and stature in a movement as a leader of the people, but he really hadn't led them anywhere yet, right? He was just building his reputation for his own sake. Now he had a place to take them. And that place was to France no longer needing a king. So, Danton, as we discussed last week, the Cordeliers produced a petition declaring liberty and monarchy incompatible. Danton was the guy who told them this is what we have to write, this petition. It had this was a highly inflammatory act now that we know the context, right? Because both the language of it's pretty inflammatory, down with monarchy, but the fact that it ignored the commune's ban on mass communal petitioning, which we talked about earlier in this episode. They were ignoring that legal edict that said you cannot do a collective petition. And they said, we don't care, we're doing it anyway. And the Cordeliers agents who went out into Paris to start getting signatures started to get harassed by National Guardsmen. And it's important to note that just because up to this point we've seen refusals of the guard to follow orders, right? The March on Versailles, the trip to Saint-Cloud, it's not because the guard saw eye to eye with the common people who Georges Danton is representing. They ignored those orders because there were simply points in time and lines that existed that the guard wouldn't cross. And at this point, it's not just the officers but the rank and file members of the guard who have to meet that active citizen requirements, which puts them on the other side of that divide that we've been talking about tonight, where they're on that side and all the commoners are on this side. So they're no longer the defenders of the people like they were the day the Bastille fell. The members of the guard had the money, the vote, and they just did not align with the everyday people of France economically, in worldview, lifestyle, or in needs. And the Paris Guard actually spent most of their time, just acting like a police force on the street, finding potential agitators like the leftist radicals who Danton and Desmoulins were leading and Marat was inciting. They spent their time locking those guys up. In the main, the 3,000 Paris Guardsmen were first and foremost loyal to the Paris Commune, as they demonstrated when they went down to arrest Marat, who was a voice of the radical left from within the people. It's important that we talk about that the guard didn't refuse orders from the perspective of they felt that they were protecting the common people anymore, because that's not where it was coming from. It was in the day after the Bastille where they were more made up of the mob. but now they are more made up of those who are in power in the assembly. The fancy pants is, meet the new boss, same as the old boss element. They are not made up of the people. So throughout this period, this run up to when the flight happened, well, even before that, clashes between loudmouth laborers and guardsmen on a power trip became routine, right? Loudmouth common people working and guardsmen who had a gun in their hand and were on a power trip. They clashed a lot. Then they picked up pace over the spring of 1791 as the rumors started to swirl and the Paris Commune laid forth all of its restrictions on mass mobilizations and petitioning. And then they really picked up after the flight to Varennes, when republicanism started to really spread quickly among the people in the aftermath of the flight in June and July 1791. And so, as the second anniversary, and yes, it's 2 years in this narrative now since the fall of the Bastille, on the second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille approached on, and I wrote it on purpose, on July 14th, 1791, the mood was very different in Paris than it had been a year prior, when they had a big parade and everyone's swearing oaths, and look at my kid, he's wearing National Guard uniform. Yeah, none of that. The altar of the fatherland got re-erected, but there would be no parades or solemn oaths. There was just simply too much bad blood floating around for anybody to really come together in the same spirit that had brought them together the year prior. That same spirit that saw commoner working next to noble or former noble, and the king hosting guardsmen in the Tuileries Garden. None of that existed. There was just too much animosity a year later. Remember, we talked about how on the first year of the fall of the Bastille, that first Fête de la Fédération, how everyone was kind of like, it seemed like a papering over a wound. Well, a year later, here is the wound. So we're going to talk about how Danton and the Cordeliers handle this petition and what they're going to do with it and what's going to happen to them, and then what's going to happen to France as we close out the episode and talk about the actual massacre at the Champ de Mars. We're going to take our second break. We'll be back. Again, thank you all for your support tonight. If you missed it earlier in the episode, it came in late, please check the VOD on YouTube and go back to about the 45-minute mark.
Clonk that follow button.
And see a message about veterans this week, but make sure you're checking in on veterans again this week. Just a difficult time for all of us. Check twice, check 3 times. Make sure the veterans are okay. I'll be right back. Thank you all for being here, hanging out for Fixer's Heavy Metal History as we wrap up the episode in the next section, get to the quiz, and then set up the Constitution of 1791, which we will reveal next week. But thanks for being here. I'll be right back.
Gentlemen, we're history.
rock!
Everybody back from your break? Because I'm back. So we talked about the upcoming second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille. The second Fête de la Fédération. Not back yet. Okay. I'll wait. Guys back yet? The second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille rolled up, and they did re-erect that same altar they had used, but there were no parades. And Danton and the Cordelier Club planned to launch a mass demonstration demanding the end to the monarchy after the second anniversary of the Bastille falling. It didn't happen on the day of the second anniversary of the Bastille. They wanted it to happen that day, but the assembly hadn't figured out what to do with the king yet. So, like, in the wake of the flight. So the Cordelier didn't really know where their first foot was going to be planted because they needed to see what that move was. The Cordelier Club had already made clear that they were moving toward a message of wanting a republican system and not a constitutional monarchy in France. But even though the Cordelier and the Jacobins have kind of merged here, the more traditional radicals within the Jacobin Club still weren't ready to go to republicanism yet. And there's Danton one night, leading up to the second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, thundering a call. He's this great orator. He's speaking. He's just thundering out this call for a republic within the Jacobin Club meeting that occurred, once every 3 days, weekdays. And he was cut off by none other than Robespierre, who asked, what is a republic? And Robespierre's point was that as long as Louis existed, Louis the person existed, there could be no government without a monarch. He could be put into a ceremonial and meaningless and very small box, but the king would exist. It was probably workable to do this to Louis, and the alternative of declaring a republic was seen by Robespierre and most of the Jacobins at this point as an instant invitation for the rest of the monarchs of Europe to invade France, because that might be the point at which they go over the line, right? It's no longer that they're holding a member of the royal family hostage, but it's that they've eliminated the concept of monarchy. And that is a viral idea. Just like in the 20th century, the Red Scare, and everyone's afraid of communism, cascading across the world because it's a populist movement. The idea of eschewing monarchy for republic is a populist movement. And the Jacobins saw it as, that's probably not going to sit well at the king of the Holy Roman Empire, or the king of Prussia, or it'll be the king, it's the queen of, the queen of Russia, the king of Prussia, the king of England. All these monarchs who have their entire structure of power based on the concept of monarchy. If they see us get rid of it, that's asking for them to come take care of us. So on July 15th, 1791, the day after the second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, the National Assembly does announce its results of weeks of investigation into the flight to Varennes. And they likely intentionally waited until after the second anniversary of the fall of the Bastille on purpose. They concluded that officially, written down to the record, Louis had not tried to escape, but had instead been abducted under a plan orchestrated by General de Bouilly. No, Danton's not going to be a day late today. The assembly also declared that the king would still be the centerpiece executive, as planned in the upcoming constitution that we will call the Constitution of 1791. So even though they tried to run, the centrists in the assembly maintained enough power around this fiction that the king hadn't tried to run but was abducted, that they intended to keep him in... They intended to keep him in power. Well, remember, Gilly, they had actually communicated with de Bouilly and got him to kind of be the scapegoat, because what's the alternative? Likely the king gets murdered, right? Someone's going to slip in there and get him eventually. further the assembly, they had provisionally suspended the king's powers, right in the immediate aftermath. And we talked about that. When they got him back, they said, your powers are suspended. And that suspension will continue until the finishing touches were put on and the Constitution of 1791 was ratified. But it was further stipulated that if Louis accepts the Constitution in its form without reservation, addendum, or amendment, that all of the powers that are outlined within this Constitution would still be his. Remember, some of these things are like, remember the suspensive veto, 2 consecutive sessions of the Assembly legislature must meet to overturn his veto. He'd get that power. They were still giving that to him, even though he had tried to run. So all of this absolutely enraged the Cordelie radicals and the extreme radical left. They saw these decisions by the assembly as simply weak. The king had obviously tried to run, to escape, and then return at the head of a foreign army. This is where they leap. But they all assumed he was going to go get an army, come back in, and hold the rest of France to account for everything that had happened. I don't know why. Maybe because he wrote it down on a piece of paper and said, I don't agree with anything after the tennis court oath. This constitution was also going to entrench the active-passive distinction, which was permanently going to disenfranchise most of the French people and would solidify the handing of power to people like Lafayette and Bailly, who were now only interested in maintaining the status quo that had basically been the way that things were since last year. So they were not happy at all about anything that the assembly had come forth with. So a demonstration on the Champ de Mars was organized to remind those in power that just because they wanted to pretend 500,000 Parisians didn't exist because they weren't active citizens, doesn't mean they don't exist. So on the night of July 16th, the next day, after the assembly put forth its, this is what we decided after the investigation, it starts to go around that there's going to be a mass demonstration calling for the removal of Louis from power the next day on the Champ de Mars. And this spread, and it reached the ear of the Paris Commune government, putting them on red alert. And Bailly, in this moment, in consultation with Lafayette, agreed that the time had probably come that they needed to declare martial law. Nowhere was it stipulated that they had the power to declare martial law, but again, the Paris Commune government just kind of acted on its own. So the crowds begin to gather on the Champ de Mars. In the late morning of July 17, 1791, Lafayette and his guard come down in a show of force intended to intimidate the mob. And it drives them off, right? This initial mob is kind of ragtag and gaggles in. It's not very well organized. But later in the day, the leadership of the Cordeliers, Danton, Desmoulins, Deslantina, they regroup. And they bring back a much larger 20,000 people. And they march back down to the Champ de Mars. Now again, the Champ de Mars is over here. It's where the Eiffel Tower sits today. It's this large park that sits on the bank of the Seine. This crowd was far more committed, much better led. When they arrived at the field, they posted this petition that had already been circulating out there. They posted a big copy of it. They posted this petition asking for the removal of Louis on the still standing altar of the fatherland that was there from 2 days prior for the much subdued second anniversary feast of the Federation. The petition, and this is where the lines start getting crossed. The petition was actually written by Jacques-Pierre Brissot, who is bottom right, who's technically a 1789er. But he's the one who wrote the petition because he was now, even though he was a member of the Society of 1789, he was a Republican now. And I mean Republican in the sense of supporting the notion of a Republican government, not in the modern Democrat-Republican sense. But Brissot writes this, not Desmoulins. The petition states, quote, "It would be as contrary to the majesty of the outraged nation as it would be contrary to its interest to confide the reins of empire to a perjurer, a traitor, and a fugitive. We formally and specifically demand that the Assembly receive the abdication made on 21 June by Louis XVI of the crown which he had been delegated and provide for his successor in the constitutional manner. And we declare that the undersigned will not recognize Louis XVI as their king unless the majority of the nation expresses a desire contrary to the present petition. End quote. Yeah, it's wordy, but it gets the point across. This petition falls short of calling outright for republic, making Louis and not the existence of the king the problem. The majority of the nation that's referred to here when they say, we will not recognize Louis XVI as king unless the majority of the nation express a desire contrary to the petition. When they say the majority of the nation, they're not talking about active citizens. They're talking about everybody. This petition does not respect that dichotomy. They are effectively saying that distinction between the electorate, or making people a part of the electorate or not, is not okay either. So by about the time 6,000 people had gotten into a line and signed the petition, Lafayette and the Guard came back down to the scene to halt things. They're giving him room to be elected as part of a constitutional monarchy. But they also know that the rest of the French people aren't going to get the right to vote anyway. Yes way. So it's kind of a moot point. Like, your only option for us to back down is to enfranchise us so we can vote and then kick him out anyway. And they knew that's what they were asking for. So 6,000 people have gotten in line and already signed the petition, and Lafayette brings the Guard down to break it up. Lafayette announces that Paris is under martial law and that everyone present was to immediately disperse. This announcement was greeted by jeering and insults, and then by rocks flying from the crowd. The Guard fired warning shots at the 20,000 assembled in the mob, with rocks and projectiles still raining down on them because it didn't move the crowd at all after the warning shots. They were still throwing stuff. Discipline within the ranks of the National Guard breaks, and they begin to fire into the crowd. It's important to note that no order to fire was given. Lafayette begins scrambling to restore order within the Guard, but the damage is done, right? This is a public massacre. People have been killed. Demonstrators have been killed. I kind of get it. You know, you throw rocks into a force that's trying to enforce the rules that they've been told to enforce, and you throw rocks at them. What are they supposed to do? Just stand there? These aren't guys in riot gear. What are they supposed to do? You fired warning shots. They didn't disperse. What's the next step? I always wonder that in this. Is the next step just to let the mob have its way? But the damage is done. Reports conflict. But when the field at the Champ de Mars was finally cleared, something like between 20 and 50 Parisians were dead, and that is a massacre. The radical press, obviously led by Jean-Paul Marat, immediately denounced the massacre at the Champ de Mars, which is what is now known as historically. They outright called for Lafayette's head as a butcher who ordered his men to mow down the people. Again, no such order was ever given. In the end, the already fast sinking...
Yes, I'm excited about this gift.
Me too. In the end, the already declining reputation of Lafayette. Remember, he had dodged several assassination attempts on the Day of the Daggers. It would never recover from this. And spoiler alert for the future, when Jean-Sylvain Bailly, later on down the line, is marched up to the guillotine, it's going to be for his role in ordering the massacre, even though he didn't. They would even move the guillotine that day to the Champ de Mars so Jean-Sylvain Bailly can get his head chopped off at the same place that the massacre occurred. For the moment, however, it's the radical leaders, Desmoulins, Danton, d'Eglantina, the radical leftist Jacobins. They're the ones who have the most to fear because it's martial law still, right? And everyone knows that these jokers were at the head of the mob. So Danton, for example, thought this was a wonderful time to take a trip to England. And so he slipped out of France before the authorities could catch up with him because, yes, they were looking for him. They were looking for all of the agitators that created the situation that led to the massacre. They're trying to find the roots. The other, and this is what we're going to start talking about next week, the other significant effect of the massacre would be to cleave the Jacobin Club in two. Jacobins will suffer another mass walkout, just like they did when the Society of 1789 was filled up by Lafayette, when those guys had had enough with how leftist the Jacobins had gone. Now the Jacobins are going to go further left with the Cordeliers section guys to an extreme, and some of the Jacobins aren't going to go with them. And so there's going to be another mass exodus from the Jacobins. This would again purge the center leftists from the Jacobins, just like it had in the past, and would leave only what is currently radical in the Jacobin ranks. And among those who would depart the Jacobins because of what's happened at the Champ de Mars are the triumvirate of Duport, Barnave, and Lamberт. And remember, these three guys are power players within the Jacobins, and they walk away, just like Mirabeau had done and like Lafayette had done. They cannot go where the Jacobins are going now. So even though they were founders, Barnave had wrote the rules for the Jacobin Club, they walk out. We're going to talk about the reasoning behind the walkout next week. But the triumvirate, as we roll in the next week, are no longer Jacobins. They're going to do what Lafayette did and form another political faction that sits more toward the center. So now we've gone through the Monarchians, which the 1789ers replaced. Now the 1789ers are the centrists, and then there's a new, not so radical faction popping to their left who's gonna supplant them and put the triumvirate in charge for a while the Jacobins, who are now just again filled with radicals, reconstitute themselves not with those who are part of the assembly. Remember, that's the reason that the 1789ers walked out, but now with the energy of the Cordeliers at their core, with Robespierre driving the bus. It will be up to this new club that the triumvirate forms to begin to defend the Constitution of 1791, because they still have credibility. Lafayette and the Society of 1789 don't have that credibility with the public anymore. I wonder if Mounier would have found himself classified as an enemy of the revolution too. At this point, yes. When we talked about his end, remember, he emigrated very quickly because he was cast as a counter-revolutionary within about 2 years. So he's pretty much gone at this point. He's actually up there on our emigre board. But as we roll into next week, obviously support for Louis continues to decline. You can't sustain this guy in power through this lie. But interesting enough, the rest of Europe starts to do a little bit of saber rattling about what's going on in France at this point, seeing what's happening to Louis, and more importantly, what the government begins to look like, because they weren't interested in stopping what was going on in France because of what was happening to Louis. They were interested in stopping what was going on in France because they did not want it to spread like a virus to the rest of Europe. And that is where we'll leave tonight's episode. We'll get to the quiz, and next week we will get all of that answered. What are the triumvirate up to? Where are the Jacobins going? Well, that's going to happen to Lafayette and the King. Where's Danton and Desmoulins going to take the Jacobins with Robespierre is a great question. But we'll also talk about what is the Constitution of 1791, because guess what? The Constitution of 1791 is going to outline the way the legislature works, and the tennis court oath was decreed until such a time that the Constitution is adopted. The days of the National Assembly are coming to an end, and they're going to be replaced by another legislative body that the Constitution of 1791 says should exist in its place. And we'll get to that probably by the beginning of September, when that new assembly, which we will call the Legislative Assembly, takes the place of the National Assembly. But off to the quiz for tonight. Thank you all for paying attention and watching and learning and asking questions and just hanging out. I really appreciate it. Way too early. The timer's already rolling and I haven't asked the question yet. But I'll try to get in there right now. Gilly, respect that, please. First question coming up right now to try to get it in for Sturf. Here's question number 1. And I didn't copy it all in time. I'm sorry. But that's what you get for using it early. First question. There are two types of revolutionary at this point in French Revolution. One are the centrists whose biggest fear is a violent mob. The other are what? It is on a timer. There are two types of revolutionaries at this point in the history of the French Revolution. One of the centrists whose biggest fear is the mob. The other type of revolutionary is what? Fear of foreign revolutions. Nope. Centrists afraid for the Courtier-led left standing up and just burning it all down. Nope, that's the ones who are afraid of the violent mob. The centrists' biggest fear is being afraid of that mob you just described. What is the other type of revolutionary? I can tell you that they are made up of people like Jean-Paul Marat, Desmoulins. The leftist radicals. What are the leftist radicals most afraid of? The insane people. They are the insane people. Going once. The centrists who want to keep power the way it is. That's the ones who don't want things to change. Gilly's the closest. Their fear is that there will be a counter-revolutionary movement led by a foreign power. Remember, the Comte de Provence declared himself regent in the name of France. And they thought that he was going to, he stated that the purpose of the court in exile was to head an army and bring it back into France. That's their greatest fear. But Gilly's the closest. And we will give it to Gilly. Next question. What job was Georges Danton handed as a law clerk in Paris that he simply excelled at? Repeating events he witnessed. Where? Go to the assembly? No. There was no assembly. 1780.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Repeating the events he witnessed is like 90% right. Remembering and repeating events in the courts. Turius! Turius with the answer! Out of nowhere, Turi gets it. Boom!
Station!
Station! Remember, he was sent down to play the Justice by the law firm to record and recount the day's events accurately. You got like 5 points in the last one? All right, so what should it be? 19? Let's amend that now. Let's fix that now. That's interesting. Should be 20. All right, should be 20. Let's fix Gilly now. Details. Quiz points. 20. It will reflect it on the next one up. I mean, I'll take it. Thank you for being honest. The next question. Now that I gotta go find my document that's got all the questions in it again. The next correct answer inputted will cycle the leaderboard. Why did Georges Danton not pursue being a delegate at the Estates General? He didn't have the money. That is correct. Money time's more accurate, but money is the answer. What's up, K-Jax? Give that one to Rocket. There we go. Gilly back to 20. Rocket crushing everybody. The next question. What was Danton doing when he led his own public militia to the Bastille? Team up! Rocket. What was Danton doing when he led his own public militia to the Bastille on July 15, 1789? Inspecting the Bastille. What was he really doing? Street cred. Rocket gets it. He was getting street cred. I mean, he was technically inspecting the Bastille. That's what he said he was doing to the governor. But the intention of it. The intention of it was to get street cred. So we're going to give that to Rocket. And in turn, Surf will get one because she did the team up there. The next question. The next question, here it comes. As the summer of 1791 turned... Locked out, no Gilly. So I'll rephrase this because I wrote it poorly. As the summer of 1791 turned, as we turned to it, what did the true loyalty of the active citizen Parisian Guard lay? That's really worded poorly. So where did the loyalty of the Parisian National Guard lay? Truly, where did their loyalties lay? With the Parisian Commune. That is correct. Next question. Rocket at 59. I spelled that word wrong. Nope, I didn't. The flight to Varennes was the spark that led the Cordeliers to doubt the need for the monarchy. What was the accelerant that assured they would petition for its demise? What thing, after the flight to Varennes, really locked in the fact that the Cordeliers was done with the monarchy? That is the answer. The decision of the Assembly kept with the fact that Louis was kidnapped, in turn still guaranteeing him his powers under the new Constitution. That was it. Rocket got the answer. Gilly still one in front of Sturf with 2 questions left in tonight's quiz. This one should be relatively easy. How many people were assembled on the Champ de Mars when Lafayette and the Paris Guard came down the second time? 20,000 is Gilly. Uh-oh, Sturf. Not 14. There were way more than 14 people. Last question of the night. Thank you all for hanging out. Really close, but no cigar. You got plenty of other points. Oh, that was Turry? No, I see 20K is Gilly. I didn't give it to Turry. I don't know what Gilly is saying. That was Turry. Oh, Sturf said 14. Sorry, meant Turry. That's all fixed now. Terry said 14. Everyone else said 20K, but Gilly was the fastest. There we go. I've been told I talk really fast during a quiz, and I like to keep doing that because I know CF Lives likes to listen to this quiz whenever he's doing all of his other stuff around the house. So if I talk really fast and he puts me on like 1.6 times speed, he's not going to be able to understand what I'm saying right now. But I know you guys just understood that. Last question of the night. You guys ready? Here we go. What was the activity of the crowd that caused discipline to break in the guard at the Champ de Mars? Throwing of rocks. That is correct. Alrighty. There we go. That's the end of the quiz for tonight. Woo! Indeed. Woo indeed. Gilly put some distance between him and Sturf. Not a whole lot, but it's there. We've been going for 2 hours and 18 minutes tonight. I really appreciate you guys hanging out, sticking with me through my message earlier on. I know I got on my soapbox, but again, it's important to me, so I really do appreciate you guys kind of rolling through that with me. We'll go Roy Storm the Bard. I haven't seen him in a long time. He's playing Diablo 2 Resurrected. But before we do that, Again, just make sure, it's the last time I'll say it tonight, if you know a veteran, reach out to them this week. Just say, hey, you okay? And when they say fine, say, no, really, are you okay? I really want to make sure this week especially you're okay. And get a little bit of a conversation going just to make sure they're okay. It would mean a lot to me. On top of any money or anything else that you want to donate to, the channel here for DAV or elsewhere, the conversation would be the biggest thing you could do for me. But we are going to get out of here. We're going to hand it over to Storm the Bard. So I'm going to get that command entered in here. And then we're going to do the normal shout-outs. I think you guys for all being here again. Don't forget that we will be back next week. Yo, Omega. Hello, goodbye. Hope you're enjoying your camping trip, my friend. Speaking of Yo, Omega, he's going to be in the shout-outs tonight, but he is on hiatus until Christmas. He did hit $10,000 for Extra Life, so more than he needed for his goal to hit that new NICU monitor for the neonatal intensive care unit at Beaumont Hospital. Super awesome stuff. But we're going to get out of here. Thank you all for being here again this week. As always, I'm glad you're still enjoying it. And let's go. There's Dustin back on Monday, probably with Ashton here at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Streams Monday through Saturday. There's Permanent hoping off the deck and back to gaming next Monday with the handyman at his house finally done. Terry, thanks for being here. Gilly, thanks for the raid in tonight. Most nights, 6 p.m. Not sure what his next night is, but give the man a follow. Intent Rocket, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Saturday morning after Dustin, playing Persona, maybe with a mix of Assassin's Creed. I'm not sure where she is on that. Gilly streaming tomorrow, 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. by the way. Surfers, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time-ish. And then again, as the Omega, Rocket streaming tomorrow, not Gilly. Omega just hit his goal in Extra Life, but we'll be on hiatus until around Christmas time as school is starting back up for him. Thank you all for being here tonight, everybody. I will talk to you later. Here we go, Stormy.
Be excellent to each other.